Chapter 15 First War of Independence. Get set. Match the following historic personalities with their names: Mangal Pandey, Tatya Tope, Nana Sahib, Rani Lakshmi Bai. India is always known for its riches of culture and wealth from the ancient times. Its extraordinary history is intimately tied to its geography. It had been a meeting ground between the East and the West, so always been an invader's paradise, while at the same time its natural isolation and magnetic religions allowed it to adapt to and absorb many of the people who penetrated its mountain passes. Chirpy says, earlier India was known as Sone ki Chidiya because of its riches. In ancient times, people from all over the world were keen to come to India for its wealth. The Persians, followed by the Iranians and Parsis, migrated to India. Then came the Mughals and the two settled down permanently in India. Genghis Khan, the Mongolian, invaded and looted India many times. Alexander the Great too came to conquer India, but went back after a battle with Porus. In the late 1500s, European explorers started sailing east for trading purposes. The Spanish and the Portuguese were originally dominant on these new sailing routes, but for some reasons, the British and Dutch were able to take more of an active role in trade with the East Indies. The Dutch initially took a lead in this, focusing mainly on spices. Concerned that the British were falling behind the Dutch on these new trading routes, on 31st December 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted over 200 British merchants the right to trade in the East Indies. One of these groups of merchants called themselves Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies, later to become simply the East India Company. The company received permission to trade in India from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. The company established trade centers called factories in India. The first factory was set up at Surat in Gujarat in 1613. Other factories were set up at Madras, now Chennai, Calcutta, now Kolkata, and Bombay, now Mumbai. To protect these factories, they built forts and maintained armed groups with advanced weapons. At that time, India was divided into small kingdoms headed by weak and selfish rulers, which were often at war with one another. The East India Company took advantage of this and started occupying Indian territories. The first large territory to be occupied by them was Bengal. It was one of the richest provinces in Indian subcontinent. As permitted by Mughal Emperor Farrukh Sir, the company did tax-free trade there and later misused their right. Siraj-ud-Daulah, the then ruler of Bengal, was suspicious of the British. He asked the British to remove their armies and guns from the fort. The British refused to do so. The Nawab declared war against the East India Company, but was defeated due to the trickery of his own general Mir Zafar. This war was known as the Battle of Plassey. It took place in 1757. After this, the British became the Diwan of Bengal. Hence, treason and disunity among Indians led to great miseries. Now, the British began to take advantage of the lack of unity among the Indian rulers. They began to capture large parts of India and thus expanded their political powers. They adopted the policy of divide and rule. They supported one king against the other. They also signed treaties with the kings who accepted the British supremacy. Gradually, almost the whole of India came under the British possession. Exploitation of Indians by British. Once the East India Company established their powers in India, they started exploiting the people. The administration of East India Company forced the farmers of Bengal and Bihar to grow indigo, a plant from which a blue powder called dye is used for dyeing clothes. This dye was used in England. The company purchased the dye at a very low cost from the Indian farmers. The farmers had no need of indigo as they needed food grains to feed themselves. As a result, the poor farmers became even more poorer, and many farmers died of starvation. The Indian cottage industry also became the victim of British. Cotton could not be grown in Britain because of the cold climate, but there was a great demand of cotton. They purchased cotton at a very low price from India, took it to England, made clothes out of it, and then they shipped back these cotton clothes to India and sold in Indian market at a low price. This affected the life of the Indian craftsmen, who used to weave clothes by hand in looms. The clothes made by them were of fine quality and of high prices. They could not compete with the prices of the British mill-made clothes. Millions of weavers lost their jobs. The British also did not allow Indians to start their own mills or factories. The British wanted to capture more and more kingdoms, so they made several unjust laws for it. One such law was the doctrine of lapse, which said that if a king died without a child, his kingdom would be taken over by the British. Through this policy, they captured Jhansi, Nagpur, and many other places. The British appointed a large number of soldiers in the British army. Bringing soldiers from Britain was a costly affair, so they also recruited Indians in the army. But Indian soldiers were paid very less, while the British soldiers on the same rank got higher salaries. The Indian soldiers were not promoted to higher ranks. Their service conditions were very harsh. They were treated with hatred by the senior British officers. Revolt of 1857. During the British Raj, there was unrest and discontent amongst the people of India. Soon many rebellions followed in various parts of the country, mainly in 1857. This was known as the Revolt of 1857. It was the important landmark in our struggle for national freedom. It is also known as the First War of Independence in the Indian history. The British called it the Sepoy Revolt or Sepoy Mutiny. The revolt was initiated by the Indian soldiers in British Armed Forces on 10th May 1857 at Meerut. The immediate cause of the revolt. The immediate cause of the revolt was the introduction of the new Enfield rifle and the greased cartridge. In loading the rifle, the sepoy, before inserting the cartridge, had to bite off its top. It was believed that the grease was made out of the fats of cows and pigs. This was objectionable to the Hindus and Muslims alike. This rumor sparked a fire of discontent against the British in the form of the revolt. The first sign of unrest appeared in 1857 at Barakpur in Bengal. A sepoy, Mangal Pandey, on 29th March 1857 killed senior officers on parade and started the revolt. Course and spread of the revolt. The revolt spread in Barampur in Bengal on 24th April 1857. About 90 men of the native cavalry stationed at Meerut refused to accept the greased cartridges. 85 of them were dismissed and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. On 10th May, the revolt started at Meerut, and the mutineers, after killing some of their officials, marched towards Delhi. On 12th May, Delhi was seized and Bahadur Shah too was proclaimed the Emperor of India. The real command was in the hands of General Bhakt Khan, who had led the revolt at Bareilly and brought the troops to Delhi. Kanpur. Here the revolt was led by Nana Sahib, who declared himself the Peshwa and governor of Bahadur Shah. Tatya Tope did most of the fighting. The rebels defeated General Windham outside Kanpur. Lucknow. The revolt was led by Hazrat Mahal, the Begum of Awadh. She had proclaimed her young son Bridges Qadri, the Nawab of Awadh, against the wishes of the British. Henry Lawrence, the British resident, was killed at Lucknow. Jhansi. After some initial vacillations, Rani Lakshmi Bai assumed the leadership of the mutiny. After being defeated at Jhansi, she captured Gwalior with the help of Tatya Tope and Afghan guards. Bareilly. Khan Bahadur Khan proclaimed himself as the Nawab and led the revolt there. The other centers of the revolt were Banaras, Allahabad, Gwalior, Nasirabad in Rajputana, Indore, Aligarh, and Kota. At all these places, the sepoys killed the senior officers and other Europeans on whom they could lay their hands. They also released prisoners from jail, plundered the treasury, and burnt land records at many places. Suppression of the revolt. The British planned and suppressed the revolt of 1857 with a feeling of vengeance. They brutally killed men, women, and even children to regain control. They hanged and shot dead the Indians at public places. At times, they tied the people on the mouth of cannons and blew them off. Bahadur Shah too proved to be a weak leader. Delhi was captured on 20th September 1857 by John Nicholson. Bahadur Shah was arrested and deported at Rangoon, where he died in 1862. The rebels were defeated by General Havelock in Kanpur. Nana Sahib, after being defeated, refused to surrender and escaped to Nepal. At Jhansi, Hugh suppressed the revolt and Rani Lakshmi Bai died on the battlefield. Banaras, Bareilly, and Gwalior were also recaptured by the British officers. Causes of the failure. The revolt was highly localized and restricted to North India. The revolt failed to embrace all the sections of the society. Many of the native rulers and the big zamindars refused to join the revolt against the British. They extended an active support to the British to suppress the revolt. Modern educated Indians were suspicious of the rebels. They feared the opposition of the rebels in bringing about social reforms. The revolt was poorly organized and lacked coordinated planning amongst the leaders. The rebels lacked a common cause and had different goals. At most places, the rebels were encouraged to revolt against the local zamindars and money lenders, and did not have a large goal to pursue. They lacked a spirit of nationalism. The British had better resources and succeeded in suppressing the revolt. They had vast resources at their disposal and were held by the modern means of transport and communication. They also had the services of capable generals as Havelock, Outram, and Lawrence were available, who could plan the suppression of the revolt well and win back their lost regions. Think a while. How did the failure of revolt affect India? Impact of the revolt. Policy change. The Queen's proclamation of November 1858 announced the policy of the British government to be followed from now on in India. It announced that the policy of territorial extension was to be abandoned. The native rulers were assured of the safety of their territory, rights and honor if they cooperated with British. The right of a ruler to adopt a child in the absence of a natural heir was accepted. A policy of divide and rule was actively pursued to keep the Hindus and Muslims divided. Administrative changes. On January 1st, 1877, Queen Victoria was proclaimed as the Queen Empress of India, and the administration of India was transferred the East India Company to the British Crown. India was to be administrated by the Secretary of State and his 15-member council through the Viceroy. The Governor-General became the Viceroy and the representative of the Crown in India. Reorganization of the Army. The army was reorganized to strengthen British control over the country and avert any further rebellions in future. The number of British soldiers was increased, and all the higher posts and key positions were filled up by the British. Quick review. The first factory was set up at Surat in Gujarat in 1613. The Battle of Plassey took place in 1757. The East India Company purchased the dye at a very low cost from the Indian farmers. The Indian cottage industry also became the victim of the British. The British did not allow Indians to start their own mills or factories. The Indian soldiers were treated with hatred by the senior British officers. Banaras, Bareilly, and Gwalior were also recaptured by the British officers.